June 5, 1944. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood at the window of his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon, staring into the pre-dawn darkness that blanketed the French countryside. His reflection in the glass revealed what the war had carved into him: deep lines around his eyes, the weight of impossible decisions etched into every feature. In his hand he clutched a decoded intelligence report that confirmed his worst fears. The Allied invasion fleet had begun its approach across the English Channel. The man they called the Desert Fox had returned from North Africa, not as the triumphant commander who had terrorized British forces at Tobruk, but as a general who understood the mathematics of defeat. For months he had pleaded with Berlin, warning that Germany had perhaps 24 hours, maybe less, to throw the Allies back into the sea once they landed, or the war would be lost. His superiors had dismissed these warnings as pessimism from a once great commander who had lost his nerve. Rommel turned from the window and studied the massive map of Normandy's coastline spread across his desk. Red pins marked the Atlantic wall's defensive positions, bunkers, artillery batteries, minefields stretching for miles. It looked formidable on paper, but Rommel knew the truth. The vaunted Atlantic Wall was a facade, a propaganda myth that hid incomplete fortifications, undermanned positions, and a fatal lack of mobile reserves positioned close enough to the beaches to make a difference. According to contemporary military analysis from the United States Army's official history publications, Rommel had identified the critical weakness in German coastal defense strategy with remarkable clarity. The panzer divisions were held too far inland, requiring explicit permission from Hitler himself to deploy them toward any invasion site. "They will come with the tide," Rommel had told his chief of staff, General Hans Speidel, weeks earlier. "They will come with overwhelming air superiority, naval bombardment that will flatten our coastal defenses, and they will establish a beachhead before we can mass our armor for a counterattack. If we cannot destroy them on the beaches in the first day, the first 24 hours, we will never push them back." The clock on the wall read 4:15 in the morning. Somewhere across that dark channel, thousands of transport ships carried American, British, and Canadian soldiers toward the beaches. The weather had been terrible for days: high winds, rough seas, heavy clouds. Rommel had actually left his headquarters 2 days prior to visit his wife Lucy in Germany for her birthday, confident that no invasion could come in such conditions. He had been wrong. The Allied commander, General Dwight Eisenhower, had gambled on a brief break in the weather, and now that gamble was paying off. Rommel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the telephone to alert his commanders. The irony burned like acid in his throat. He had predicted this moment with prophetic accuracy, had begged for the authority to position his forces where they could respond immediately, had warned that the first day would decide everything. And now, as that day arrived, he found himself exactly where he had feared, too far from his panzer divisions, unable to act without authorization from a Führer who was sleeping in Bavaria and had given strict orders not to be disturbed, facing an enemy who understood that the next 24 hours would determine whether Nazi Germany would survive or collapse. The invasion had begun. The clock was already ticking on Rommel's 24-hour window, and Germany was already losing precious minutes it could never recover. June 6, 1944, 06:30 hours. The thunder of naval guns rolled across the Normandy coast like the voice of an angry god. HMS Warspite, HMS Ramillies, USS Texas, USS Arkansas, and dozens of other warships unleashed a bombardment that made the earth itself shudder. Rommel's worst predictions were manifesting with terrifying precision. Major Werner Pluskat, commanding the bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach, stood frozen at his observation post, binoculars pressed to his eyes. What he saw defied comprehension: the entire horizon, as far as he could see in either direction, filled with ships. Thousands of vessels, a floating city of steel stretching across the English Channel. He grabbed the telephone, his voice cracking as he reported to headquarters. "The invasion fleet. It must be 10,000 ships." The response from his superior was skeptical. "Where are they heading?" "Straight for me." Pluskat screamed into the phone. At La Roche-Guyon, Rommel received the first confirmed reports at 7 o'clock. 5 separate landing zones: Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach. American airborne divisions had already dropped behind the lines during the night. The scale of the operation exceeded even his direst estimates. He immediately ordered all available forces to move toward the coast, knowing already that he was hours behind where he needed to be. The real catastrophe, however, was unfolding in Bavaria. Adolf Hitler had taken sleeping pills and retired late. His staff, terrified of waking him, refused to authorize the release of the panzer divisions that Rommel desperately needed. The 12th SS Panzer Division and Panzerlehr Division, the most powerful armored formations available, sat idle, waiting for orders that would not come until Hitler woke naturally that afternoon. According to research documented in Cornelius Ryan's comprehensive historical work, the longest day, this delay in releasing the panzers represented perhaps the single most consequential command failure of the entire invasion, gifting the Allies precious hours to establish their beachheads. On Omaha Beach, American soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions waded into a nightmare. The preliminary bombardment had missed most of the German fortifications, and now machine guns from the bluffs above carved through the landing craft like scythes through wheat. Soldiers dropped into water over their heads, weighted down with equipment, drowning before they reached the sand. Those who made it to the beach found themselves pinned down, unable to advance, unable to retreat, caught in a killing zone that turned the surf red. Captain John Robert Slaughter of the 29th Division would later describe watching his friends die around him in those first minutes, the beach becoming a scene from hell itself. Bodies floated in the tide. Wounded men crawled toward the seawall. The entire invasion hung by a thread on that blood-soaked stretch of sand. But further east, on the British and Canadian beaches, the landings proceeded with less catastrophic losses. Specialized armored Churchill tanks modified to clear mines, lay bridges, and flame bunkers helped the British forces push inland more quickly. The Canadians at Juno Beach fought through fierce resistance but established a solid foothold. At Sword Beach, British commandos linked up with airborne forces holding the vital Pegasus Bridge. Rommel, racing back to his headquarters from Germany, listened to the reports flooding in and felt the 24-hour window already beginning to close. It was now 10 o'clock in the morning. The Allies had been ashore for nearly 4 hours. His panzer division still had not received authorization to move. Every passing minute meant more Allied troops, more vehicles, more supplies flowing across those beaches. He had told them. He had warned everyone who would listen. Stop them in the first day or lose the war. The first day was already slipping through Germany's fingers, and Rommel could do nothing but watch the prophecy fulfill itself while Hitler slept and the bureaucracy of the Third Reich paralyzed the only forces that might have made a difference. June 6, 1944, 1400 hours. 8 hours since the first Allied soldiers hit the beaches. Field Marshal Rommel finally reached his command post at La Roche-Guyon, his staff car having raced through the French countryside at dangerous speeds. The moment he burst through the door, he demanded the status of the panzer divisions. Still awaiting authorization from the Führer's headquarters, Herr Feldmarschall, General Speidel reported grimly. They will not release the reserves without his direct approval. Rommel's fist slammed down on the map table with such force that officers across the room jumped. 8 hours! We have given them 8 hours to dig in. His face flushed with rage and frustration. I told everyone we must throw them back into the sea within 24 hours or we will never dislodge them. Already a third of that time is gone and our panzers sit idle. Through the chaos of contradictory reports, a picture gradually emerged. The Americans at Utah Beach had linked up with the airborne forces and were pushing inland. The British had penetrated several miles beyond Sword Beach. Only at Omaha had the defenders come close to Rommel's vision of stopping the invasion at the waterline, but even there, small groups of Americans had begun to work their way up the bluffs, flanking the German positions one bunker at a time. Lieutenant Colonel Fritz Ziegelmann, operations officer for the 752nd Infantry Division, watched the disaster unfold from his command post overlooking Omaha Beach for a few hours that morning. He had believed they might actually drive the Americans back into the sea. The beach had been carpeted with American dead and wounded. But around noon, everything changed. American destroyers had moved incredibly close to shore, dangerously close, risking running aground, and began firing directly at the German bunkers with devastating accuracy. Under this covering fire, small groups of infantry had found gaps in the defenses and were now behind the main defensive line. At 1500 hours, Hitler finally awoke. When briefed on the invasion, his first reaction was satisfaction. "So they have come," he reportedly said. "Now we will smash them." He authorized the release of the panzer divisions at 1600 hours, 10 hours after the landings began. According to military historians writing in the Journal of Military History, this 10-hour delay effectively doomed any German counterattack to failure, as it meant the panzer divisions would arrive piecemeal throughout the night and following day, rather than in a concentrated mass that might have overwhelmed the still vulnerable beachheads. Rommel immediately ordered the 12th SS Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division to move toward the coast with all possible speed, but all possible speed was now a cruel joke. The moment the panzer columns began moving, Allied fighter bombers appeared in the sky like hunting hawks. The Allies had achieved total air superiority. Every road leading to the coast became a shooting gallery. Young SS tankers, many of them teenagers who had never experienced combat, watched in horror as P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons screamed down from the clouds, their rockets and machine guns turning tanks into burning coffins. The columns had to hide during daylight, moving only at night. A journey that should have taken hours stretched into days. Rommel's mobile reserves were being bled white before they even reached the battlefield. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, managed to mount a counterattack toward Sword Beach that evening. His tanks actually reached positions where they could see the sea and the Allied shipping beyond. For a moment, one brief, tantalizing moment, it seemed possible that German armor might still split the British beachhead. But the attack lacked support, lacked coordination, and was ultimately driven back by concentrated anti-tank fire and naval bombardment. As darkness fell on June 6th, Rommel stood again at his window, smoking one of his rare cigarettes. The reports were still incomplete, still contradictory, but the essential truth was undeniable. The Allies had established 5 separate beachheads. More than 150,000 soldiers were ashore. The Atlantic Wall had been breached in a single day. 24 hours, he had said. They had 24 hours to throw the Allies back or lose the war. Half of that time was already gone, and Germany's counterattack had not even begun. June 7, 1944, 0800 hours, 32 hours since the invasion began. Field Marshal Rommel sat in the conference room at La Roche-Guyon, listening to Adolf Hitler's voice crackle through the telephone line from Berchtesgaden. The Führer was in full oration mode, and Rommel's jaw clenched tighter with each passing minute. "The invasion is a feint, Rommel. The real invasion will come at Pas-de-Calais. You must maintain strong forces there. Do not commit all your reserves to Normandy." Hitler's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had never set foot on the Normandy beaches, never seen the armada of ships, never watched the sky darken with Allied aircraft. Rommel interrupted, a dangerous breach of protocol. "Mein Führer, respectfully, I am looking at intelligence reports that show more than 150,000 enemy soldiers are already ashore. This is no feint. This is the main invasion. Every hour we delay concentration of our forces, the Allies dig deeper. You worry too much, Rommel. We will drive them back into the sea. The Atlantic Wall will hold. The Atlantic Wall has already been breached at 5 points, Rommel said, his voice tight with controlled fury. I warned that we had 24 hours, and I am telling you that you have all the time you need. Germany's wonder weapons will turn the tide. The Virgil-Tungshof rockets will rain down on London. Our jet fighters will sweep the skies clean. We will crush this invasion and then turn our full attention back to the east. According to documentation from the German Federal Military Archives, this telephone conversation exemplified the fundamental disconnect between Hitler's strategic delusions and the reality his field commanders faced, a disconnect that would prove fatal to Germany's chances of defeating the invasion. After Hitler disconnected, Rommel turned to his staff officers, his face ashen. He does not understand. He will not understand until it is too late. He looked at the map where pins now showed, Allied penetration lines extending several miles inland from all 5 beaches. The 24 hours are gone. The window has closed. But Rommel was not a man to surrender to despair, even when facing impossible odds. If the critical first day had been lost, perhaps something could still be salvaged in the critical first week. He ordered every available unit to attack, to contest every village, every hedgerow, every crossroad. If the Allies could not be thrown back into the sea, perhaps they could be contained in a narrow beachhead and bled white through attrition. The 12th SS Panzer Division, finally reaching the front after a journey that should have taken hours but had stretched across 2 days due to Allied air attacks, launched fierce counterattacks against the Canadian positions near Caen. These teenage SS soldiers fought with fanatical determination, their Hitler Youth indoctrination overcoming their lack of combat experience. They inflicted heavy casualties on the Canadians, but they could not break through. The window that Rommel had identified, the brief moment when the invasion might be crushed, had permanently closed. At Omaha Beach, American engineers worked frantically to clear obstacles and establish a functioning port facility. The beach that had been a slaughterhouse 36 hours earlier was now an organized logistics operation. Supplies flowed ashore in ever-increasing volume. General Omar Bradley, who had feared on the afternoon of June 6 that he might have to evacuate Omaha, now watched his forces link up with the British advancing from Gold Beach. Rommel toured the front personally, something few German field marshals did. He visited forward positions, spoke with battalion commanders, assessed the situation with his own eyes. What he saw confirmed his worst analysis. The Allies were establishing a defensive perimeter too strong to break with the forces Germany could bring to bear. Every German counterattack was met with devastating artillery fire, naval bombardment, and swarms of fighter bombers. The Allies owned the skies, and that single fact made mobile warfare, the kind of warfare at which Rommel excelled, virtually impossible. In the hedgerow country of the Normandy bocage, German defenders discovered terrain that favored defense. Each field was a natural fortress, bounded by ancient earthen walls topped with dense vegetation. A handful of determined soldiers with machine guns could hold up an entire American company. Perhaps, Rommel calculated, the invasion could not be defeated, but it might be contained long enough for diplomatic negotiations. Perhaps if he could hold the Allies in Normandy through the summer, prove that liberating France would cost hundreds of thousands of casualties, the alliance between the Western powers and the Soviet Union might fracture. But even as Rommel grasped at these strategic straws, he knew the fundamental truth. The 24-hour window was gone. Germany had lost the race. June 14, 1944. 8 days since the invasion. Field Marshal Rommel stood in a field near the village of Margeville, waiting for Adolf Hitler to arrive for a rare conference outside of Germany. The Führer's heavily armored train had brought him to this bunker complex built years earlier for a planned invasion of Britain that never materialized. Now it would host a meeting to discuss how to respond to Britain's successful invasion of France. Rommel had prepared a frank assessment of the military situation. Every word would be dangerous to speak, but he had resolved to tell Hitler the truth, regardless of consequences. The field marshal, who had once been the regime's favorite general, who had dined with Hitler and been celebrated in propaganda newsreels, was about to become the prophet of Germany's doom. Hitler emerged from the bunker, looking older than Rommel remembered. The Führer's hands trembled, whether from Parkinson's disease or the strain of managing a war on multiple fronts, Rommel could not tell. They exchanged salutes, then moved inside for the conference. Rommel began with the numbers. Mein Führer, the Allies have now landed over 500,000 men. They control a beachhead 60 miles wide and 20 miles deep. We have been unable to contain them, much less drive them back, he pointed to the map. Every counterattack is met with overwhelming firepower. Their air superiority is absolute. Our panzer divisions are being destroyed piecemeal before they can even engage the enemy. Hitler waved his hand dismissively. We will commit more forces. The Vergeltungswaffe weapons will demoralize the British population. They will sue for peace. Mein Führer, I must speak plainly. Rommel's voice took on an edge that made his staff officers shift uncomfortably. I told you before the invasion that we had 24 hours to defeat it or lose the war. Those 24 hours came and went. The reserves were released too late, the window closed. We have already lost the battle for Normandy. The question now is whether we lose just France or all of Germany. According to historian Samuel Mitchum's work on Rommel, this conference marked the point where the Desert Fox openly broke with Hitler's fantasy of victory, risking his own life to speak truth to a dictator who had stopped tolerating dissent. The room fell silent. To openly tell Hitler that Germany was losing was to invite accusations of defeatism, possibly arrest, possibly execution. But Rommel continued. The Western Allies will break out of Normandy. They will liberate France. They will cross the Rhine. Meanwhile, the Soviets advance from the east. Germany is caught between two massive forces, and we lack the strength to hold either front. The only rational course is to seek terms, to negotiate. Hitler's fist crashed down on the table. Never, we will never surrender. Germany will fight to the last man, the last bullet. We will turn every city into a fortress. Our enemies will drown in their own blood before they conquer the Reich. Rommel met Hitler's wild eyes steadily. Then Germany will be destroyed, Main for utterly destroyed. And the destruction will be your responsibility. The conference ended in shouting. Hitler stormed back to his train, leaving orders that Rommel was to hold Normandy at all costs. No retreat, no withdrawal, no strategic flexibility. The same orders that had doomed the Sixth Army at Stalingrad would now doom Army Group B in France. As Hitler's train departed, Rommel turned to General Speidel. He is insane, completely divorced from reality. He will destroy Germany rather than admit defeat. Rommel was now faced with an impossible choice. He was a German officer bound by oath to obey. But he was also a man who could clearly see that continued obedience meant the complete annihilation of his homeland. On June 17th, just 3 days after the Margeville Conference, Rommel made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable a year earlier. He began quietly reaching out to German officers who shared his assessment that the war was lost and Hitler must be removed from power. The Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated general, was beginning the journey that would lead him toward treason not against Germany, but against the Führer who was destroying Germany. Meanwhile, in Normandy, American forces captured Cherbourg, giving the Allies their first major port. British forces ground forward toward Caen against fierce resistance from the SS Panzer divisions. The beachhead expanded day by day, mile by mile. Rommel had been proven correct. The 24-hour window had closed. The Allies would not be thrown back into the sea. The liberation of Western Europe had become inevitable. The only question remaining was how much of Germany would be left standing when the war finally ended. July 17, 1944. 41 days since the invasion. Field Marshal Rommel's staff car raced along a French country road near the village of Saint-Foy-de-Montgomery. The military situation had deteriorated exactly as Rommel had predicted. The Americans had broken through at Saint-Lay. The British were finally capturing Caen after weeks of brutal urban combat. The Normandy beachhead that Germany had needed to crush within 24 hours had become an Allied stronghold housing over 1 million troops. Rommel was returning from another inspection of forward positions, another series of conversations with exhausted commanders who lacked fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. He had just told General Hans Eberbach, "The war is lost. We must end it." Such talk, if reported to Berlin, would mean a firing squad. But Rommel no longer cared about personal consequences. Germany was being bled to death while Hitler fantasized about wonder weapons and final victories. The staff car rounded a curve. Suddenly, Rommel's driver shouted a warning. Above the tree line, 2 British Spitfires appeared, their engines screaming as they dove toward the road. The pilots had spotted the unmistakable profile of a German staff car prime target. Machine gun fire raked the road. The driver desperately tried to evade, but it was too late. Bullets shattered the windscreen. The car swerved violently, left the road, and crashed into a ditch. Rommel, thrown partially from the vehicle, sustained severe head injuries, a fractured skull, brain trauma, facial lacerations. His aide, Captain Helmuth Lang, pulled the unconscious field marshal from the wreckage. By a stroke of fortune or perhaps misfortune, a German military ambulance happened to be nearby and rushed Rommel to a hospital. The Desert Fox would survive, but his war was over. The man who had understood so clearly how to defeat the invasion, who had warned that Germany had only 24 hours to throw the Allies back, would spend the critical weeks of the Normandy campaign in a hospital bed, powerless to influence events. According to David Fraser's comprehensive biography of Rommel, the timing of this attack, whether by coincidence or by design, removed from the battlefield the one German commander the Allies truly feared, the one general who might have made the defense of France more costly than it ultimately became. While Rommel lay unconscious, the conspiracy against Hitler accelerated. On July 20th, just 3 days after Rommel's injury, Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb in Hitler's East Prussian headquarters. The explosion tore through the conference room, killing and wounding several officers. But Hitler survived, protected by the heavy oak table. The conspiracy collapsed. The Gestapo began rounding up anyone associated with the plot. Rommel's name surfaced during interrogations. While the field marshal had not been directly involved in the July 20th plot, he had been in contact with the conspirators. He had agreed that Hitler must be removed, though he had argued for arrest rather than assassination. For the Nazi regime, this distinction was meaningless. Erwin Rommel, hero of the Afrika Korps, the Desert Fox, had become a traitor. In Normandy, the battle reached its climax. On July 25th, American forces launched Operation Cobra, breaking through German defenses at Saint-Lay. The hedgerow country that had slowed the Allied advance for weeks was suddenly behind them. American armor poured into Brittany and raced toward the Seine. The German Seventh Army, pinned by the British around Caen and hammered by the Americans from the west, began to collapse. Hitler ordered his forces to counterattack, to drive to the coast at Avranches and cut off the American breakout. It was madness. The exposed panzer divisions were annihilated by Allied fighter bombers. Tens of thousands of German soldiers became trapped in the Falaise pocket, surrounded on all sides. The roads filled with burning vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment. The army that Rommel had warned must crush the invasion within 24 hours was being crushed itself. By mid-August, the battle for Normandy was over. The Germans had suffered catastrophic losses, approximately 200,000 casualties, including 50,000 dead. 2 entire armies had been effectively destroyed. Paris was liberated on August 25th. The Allies were racing toward the German border. Rommel, recovering at his home in Herrlingen, listened to the reports and understood that everything he had predicted had come to pass. Germany had failed to crush the invasion in the first day, and now Germany was losing the war. The 24-hour window had closed on June 6th, and with it had closed any chance of German victory. His warnings had been proven correct, but being right brought no satisfaction, only the bitter knowledge that the catastrophe had been entirely avoidable if anyone in Berlin had listened. October 14th, 1944. 4 months and 8 days since the invasion. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel sat in his study at Herrlingen, his head still wrapped in bandages from the injuries sustained in July. He had been summoned to Berlin twice for meetings about his future command, but each time the summons had been mysteriously withdrawn. Now he understood why. 2 vehicles pulled up to his house. General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Ernst Meisel climbed out, their faces grim. Rommel's wife, Lucy, sensing danger, asked if she should send for their son Manfred, who was nearby. The general said it would be appropriate. Burgdorf got straight to the point once they were alone with Rommel in his study. Herr Feldmarschall, your name has come up in connection with the July 20th.